Mga Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world, thank you very much for joining us. And now to the news. A huge fire tore through a 19-story commercial building in Dhaka with many office workers feared trapped in this latest major inferno to hit the Bangladesh capital. At least 8 people have been confirmed dead after the fire broke out in a 19-story commercial building in Dhaka, according to officials, weeks after a deadly blaze in the Bangladeshi capital left at least 70 people dead. Several people are still believed to be trapped inside the tower in the Banani area of the Bangladeshi capital, according to the Daily Star News website. There were no official word on how many people were trapped inside. 3 people died after jumping from the blazing skyscraper, while 2 others appear to have died from the effects of the blaze, officials told AFP news agency. People were seen screaming for help from windows, while some lowered themselves down the side of the building. Now, United Hospital spokesman Sazadur Rahman said 3 people appear to have died after jumping from upper floors of the building. He said at least 8 other people were being treated at the hospital. A military spokesman, Abdullah Ibn Zaid, said the body of a Sri Lankan man was brought to the Army's Kurmitali Hospital, and another 45 people were being treated there. Another fatality was reported at the Dhaka Medical College Hospital. Fire disasters regularly hit Bangladesh major cities, where safety standards are notoriously lax. A massive blaze in Dhaka Old Quarter of February 21 killed at least 70 people and injured 50 others. Fire service officials said chemicals illegally stored in an apartment building exploded and set alight 5 buildings in nearby streets. Now, that blaze took more than 12 hours to control. Now, we will be giving you more updates as we follow this developing story. In other news, President Hassan Rouhani traveled to flood-hit zones of Iran for the first time after 9 days of heavy rains that have inundated most of the country and killed 43 people. Take a look. The authorities have been struggling to cope with flooding after extreme rainfall, which at times has been equivalent to half of the average annual levels within 24 hours. The disaster, which one government minister blamed on climate change, struck in the middle of Iranian New Year break, with many relief workers on leave and millions of holiday makers on the roads. The deluge spread rapidly from the north to the west and south of the country on March 25 before hitting the center of Iran as the weather front moved eastwards. Rain is still falling in some parts of the flood-stricken areas. The Iranian authorities are urging residents to remain on alert. In other news now, British Prime Minister Theresa May will renew attempts to push through her Brexit plan after she dramatically offered to quit to save her deal, and MPs failed in their own bid to break the deadlock. At risk of losing control of the process of leaving the European Union, the leader announced she would resign if Parliament finally backed her withdrawal agreement. Now, the offer came just hours before the House of Commons took part in an unprecedented series of votes to seek an alternative plan, but all 8 proposals failed to find a majority, highlighting divisions among MPs. The options, which included a customs union with the EU and a referendum on any Brexit deal, were supposed to help find a consensus over how best to leave the EU.
That sounds awfully like a recipe for regression away from those standards and damaging workers' rights. Mr. Speaker, after the two largest defeats ever in parliamentary history, surely the Prime Minister should be listening to Parliament. She didn't answer my question about whether or not an agreement reached in this House would become the negotiating position of the government. I think the House, and perhaps more importantly, the whole country, deserves to know the answer to that question. Mr. Speaker, this country is on hold while the government is in complete paralysis. The vital issues facing our country, from the devastation of public services to homelessness to knife crime, have been neglected. The Prime Minister is failing to deliver Brexit because she can't build a consensus, is unable to compromise and unable to reunite the country. Instead, she's stoking further divisions. She is unable to resolve the central issues facing Britain today, and she is frankly unable to govern. The Prime Minister faces, Mr. Speaker, a very clear choice. The one endorsed by the country and many of her own party: either listen and change course or go. Which is it to be?
Prime Minister!
Can I just say, the right honourable gentleman raises the question of the indicative votes tonight. I actually answered that question in this House earlier this week, but he might want to talk to his shadow Brexit secretary, who's made clear that actually the Labour Party won't commit to supporting the result of any of the indicative votes tonight. And then he talks about what's happening in this country. Well, let's just look at what is going to be happening in this country next week. Nearly £1 billion extra for the police, £1.4 billion more available for local councils, £1.1 billion extra for our schools, another fuel duty freeze, another rise in national living wage, another tax cut. That's under the Conservatives. What would Labour give us? He wants to scrap Trident, he wants to pull out of NATO. Labour would give us capital flight, a run on the pound, a dropping living standards. The biggest threat to our standing in the world, to our defence and to our economy is sitting on the Labour front bench.
Now, the British Prime Minister said she would resign as party leader after May 22nd, the new Brexit date, but stay on as Prime Minister until a new leader is elected. She said she knows there is a desire for a new approach and new leadership in the second phase of the Brexit negotiations, and that she won't stand in the way of that. May has already secured an arrangement to push back the departure date originally set for Friday. The EU agreed to delay it until late May if Parliament approves a Brexit deal this week. Meanwhile, the head of the European Council said he would be open to granting an even longer extension. He also acknowledged the recent push by British citizens to not leave the bloc at all.
You cannot betray the 6 million people who signed the petition to revoke Article 50, the 1 million people who marched for a people's vote, or the increasing majority of people who want to remain in the European Union. They may feel that they are not sufficiently represented by the UK Parliament, but they must feel that they are represented by you in this chamber, because they are Europeans. Thank you.
Meanwhile, an analyst said he believes the UK may need a general election or referendum to get through to the next stage of the Brexit process, despite Prime Minister Theresa May offering to resign in a bid to get Parliament to back her Brexit deal. Take a listen.
That it's likely that Theresa May will be heartened to give her deal one more go, but it also increases the chances of things like a general election or a referendum, things that are the only way of resolving a gridlock if we really can't find a way out through a different mechanism. The numbers still don't stack up, even after Theresa May has played arguably her last hand as leader. So I really think we're in a position now where, without some sort of electoral event, be it a referendum or a general election, it's really hard to see how we can get through to the next stage of the Brexit talks.
Now, May agreed a deal with the EU last week to delay Brexit amid fears Britain was heading for a potentially catastrophic no-deal exit on Friday. If her deal is passed by MPs this week, Brexit will happen on May 22nd, but if not, she must return to Brussels before April 12 to explain what happens next. The British Parliament is deeply divided over Brexit, reflecting splits in the country that voted 52% to 48% in 2016 to end its four-decade relationship with the EU. MPs have so far only been able to agree that they dislike May's deal and that they do not want to leave with no deal at all. Now, some of the opposition to the Prime Minister's plan is softening. Leading Brexit supporter Boris Johnson, a likely contender to replace May, told fellow MPs on Wednesday he would support the deal, while several fellow hardliners have also switched.
Overall, it's damaging faith in politics and faith in the House of Commons, because people think surely these MPs are paid to do a job and they can't get it through. Obviously it's a lot more complicated than that. It's really difficult to come to hard decisions, but from the outside it's really difficult to follow and hard to understand why we're still in this mess.
Eagle News International will be right back. Stay tuned. Russian officials have welcomed the results of the Mueller report, which found that neither President Trump nor any of his aides colluded with Russia during the 2016 U.S. election. Here's the response coming from the Information and Press Department of the Russian Foreign Ministry that EBC got from an email. Take a look. We have taken note of the summary of the main collusions from Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into the purity of the 2016 U.S. presidential election submitted by the U.S. Department of Justice. The main conclusion, which is that Donald Trump's election staff did not conspire with Russia, was to be expected. It's surprising, though, that it took 19 lawyers who were assisted by a team of 40 FBI agents, intelligence, forensic accountants, and other professional staff issued more than 2,800 subpoenas, executed nearly 500 search warrants, and interviewed approximately 500 witnesses. Nearly 2 years to come to this conclusion. In other words, it took huge efforts and obviously a great deal of the taxpayers' money to overturn an obvious fabrication. Since fake news about the alleged Russian interference was first published nearly 3 years ago, Moscow has pointed out more than once that it was a trumped-up story. Over that period of time, Moscow has repeatedly asked for corroboration from the previous administration, which published this fabrication in the first place, and later from the Trump administration. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation has not produced any proof of Moscow's involvement in the infamous cyber attacks and other attempts to erode the American democracy, a charge that has been constantly brought against Russia. They added, "We hope that Washington will eventually muster the courage to officially admit that there was no collusion whatsoever and that all the allegations about Russian interference are nothing more than a defamation attempt designed for use in U.S. political infighting. This will likely end this never-ending story." In other news, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern welcomed Facebook's move to curb support for white nationalism on its platforms, but said more is needed to be done in the wake of the Christchurch mosque attacks. The social media giant has unveiled tougher guidelines on hate speech for Facebook and Instagram, ruling that white nationalism and white separatism are both linked to organized hate groups and will be banned. When making the announcement, the California-based company didn't specifically reference the March 15 Christchurch atrocity that claimed 50 lives when a self-avowed white supremacist targeting Muslims opened fire in 2 mosques. But Ardern made it clear she believed it was a direct response to the criticism that has since been leveled at Facebook, which the accused gunman used to live stream the attack.
In the wake of the terrorist attack, there is much work to do. You will have seen the reports overnight that Facebook has taken steps to extend its application of hate speech to prohibit the promotion and support of white nationalism and white separatism. Arguably, these categories should always have fallen within the community guidelines of hate speech, but nevertheless, it's positive that clarification has now been made in the wake of the attack here in Christchurch. For those who have joined us both from
Ardern also said the goal was to limit harmful content while preserving a free, open and secure internet, noting that countries including Australia, Ireland and Germany were all wrestling with the issue of dealing with extremist material on social media. Ardern said a global approach was needed.
So, that will be reflected in the remembrance service.
Indonesia's president has started beaming a hologram of himself to reach voters in key battleground provinces as he shuttles around the Southeast Asian archipelago ahead of national polls. Joko Widodo, running for re-election in the world's 3rd biggest democracy, has a tight schedule, so he and his vice presidential running mate are projecting 3-dimensional images of themselves at some campaign rallies, his team said. The high-tech campaign launched this week and is targeting the heavily populated provinces of West, Central and East Java, seen as key sources of support. More than 190 million people are registered to vote on April 17, with thousands running for seats in parliament and local councils across Indonesia, the world's biggest Muslim-majority nation.
Semua yang sudah kita kerjakan, yang tadi selama 5 tahun ini
To Venezuela now, people in Caracas are looking for ways to charge their cell phones and find a phone signal as a massive, almost nationwide blackout affects Venezuela for the third night in a row.
Dentro de este caos que tenemos en el país, falla eléctrica a nivel nacional, fallan las señales transmisoras de la telefonía digital. Tengo ese contrato con Digitel, me vengo acá, que es el único sitio donde puedo conseguir señal. Estoy incomunicado el resto del día.
The government of President Nicolas Maduro, which blamed the blackouts on U.S. cybernetic attacks and opposition sabotage and terrorism, decreed the closure of public offices and schools until Wednesday night. Communications Minister Jorge Rodriguez said a new power cut Wednesday had plunged some parts of Caracas and other regions into darkness once again, shortly after electricity had been restored. He said work was continuing to fix equipment damaged by the terrorism. The outage was affecting 21 of Venezuela's 23 states, according to users on social media. And staying in Venezuela, Juan Guaido, the opposition leader, whom the U.S. and many of its allies recognize as the country's interim president over illegitimate dictator Maduro, called for a national protest on Saturday over, quote, the lack of public services. The light has gone. We can't remain passive actors, he told supporters, and he has rejected the government allegations that the opposition was behind the latest blackout as lies.
Convocamos este sábado en todo el territorio nacional, a rechazar, a exigir el cese de la usurpación, a rechazar la falta de servicio público, que se fuera la electricidad.
Outside of the anxiety and political exchanges over the blackout, the presence of Russian troops in Venezuela has made the climate more hot. Under Venezuela's constitution, any foreign military mission in the country needs to be approved by the Congress. Now, Russia, Maduro's main ally and one of its biggest creditors, along with China, on the weekend sent 100 troops and 35 tons of military equipment aboard 2 flights to Caracas. Moscow said it was done in full respect for Venezuela's legal norms and to head off what it described as a U.S. organized coup. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump said Russia has to get out of Venezuela after it deployed troops and equipment there. As he welcomed to the White House, Fabiana Rosales, the wife of opposition leader Juan Guaido, recognized by the U.S. and more than 50 other countries as Venezuela's interim president.
Russia has to get out.
Now, President Trump also said all options are open regarding Venezuela, adding that Nicolas Maduro's government is under a lot of pressure right now. Take a look.
Well, they've got a lot of pressure right now. They have no money, they have no oil, they have no nothing. They got plenty of pressure right now, so we'll see. They have no electricity, and other than military, you can't get any more pressure than they have. We'll see. We'll see. All options are open. Just so you understand, all options are open. We are with Venezuela. We are with your husband, as you know, and we're with the people that he represents, which is a big majority of the country. What's happening there should not happen and be allowed to happen anywhere. So we're with you 100%.
National Assembly, Juan Guaido is the only legitimate president of Venezuela. And Venezuela is in crisis. After years of dictatorship and oppression,
The news continues here on Eagle News International. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
2:30 p.m.
Welcome back. Senior U.S. official Rodney Hunter told Security Council that the signed proclamation affirming his country's recognition of the Golan as part of the State of Israel does not affect the 1974 disengagement agreement nor undermines UNDOF's mandate in any way. He noted that the decision of recognizing the Golan Heights as part of the State of Israel is of critical, strategic, and security importance to the State of Israel, and the U.S. believes it can contribute to stability. Let's listen in.
This announcement does not affect the 1974 disengagement agreement, nor do we believe that it undermines UNDOF's mandate in any way. UNDOF continues to have a vital role to play in preserving stability between Israel and Syria, most importantly by ensuring that the area of separation is a buffer zone free from any military presence or activities other than those of UNDOF. The United States and this Council cannot accept Syria's efforts to establish its presence in the area of separation as a new norm. Therefore, the United States calls on the Russian Federation to use its influence with the Assad regime to compel the Syrian forces to uphold their commitment to the Disengagement of Forces Agreement and immediately withdraw from the area of separation. The United States strongly supports and affirms Israel's sovereign right to self-defense. The United States welcomes the mission's progress in returning to its Bravo side operations. Recent events make clear that Syrian armed forces activities on the Bravo side go beyond those agreed to in the disengagement agreement. The United States encourages UNDOF and the observer group Golan to resume inspections in the area of limitation on the Bravo side as soon as practical, given conditions on the ground.
إن خطورة مثل هذه الممارسات الأمريكية تتمثل في أنها تعكس جنوحا خطيرا وأعمى غير مسبوق لدى الإدارة الأمريكية الحالية نحو تقويض القانون الدولي وإهانة الأمم المتحدة والضرب بعرض الحائط بكل المرجعيات والإرث القانوني والقرارات التي صدرت عن هذا المجلس وعن الجمعية العامة بخصوص الصراع العربي الإسرائيلي وحتمية إنهاء احتلال إسرائيل للأراضي العربية المحتلة وانسحابها منها حتى خط الرابع من حزيران يونيو 1967.
The Syrian ambassador comes here to talk about the Golan Heights. Shame on you. Where were you when your government was gassing children? Shame on you for dropping barrel bombs on your people. Shame on you for inviting the Iranians into your country.
And she is the second largest.
No nation in the world would give up strategic land to its most dangerous enemy. Without the Golan Heights, Israel will find Quds soldiers on the tip of the Sea of Galilee. We will never let that happen.
Now, President Donald Trump signed a proclamation on Monday in which the U.S. recognized Israel's annexation of the strategic plateau that it seized in 1967 and annexed in 1981. Speaker after speaker at this council session supported Syria's sovereignty over the Golan Heights and opposed Israel's annexation after Trump's proclamation. Syria's closest ally, Russia, urged governments to continue to view the Golan Heights as Israeli-occupied territory. The U.S. defended its decision, arguing the recognition bolstered Israel's security and could contribute to the stability of the entire Middle East by keeping Syria and its Iranian ally in check. Now, staying in the Middle East, 8 years ago this month, the Syrian conflict began, leading to a humanitarian crisis that is far from over. Now, on Wednesday, Ramesh Rajasingam, a senior official from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, briefed the Security Council on behalf of the UN's humanitarian chief, Mark Lowcock. 11.7 million people in Syria, he said, require humanitarian assistance and protection, and more than 5.6 million Syrians are living as refugees across the region. Although fighting in the country has diminished, a growing number of civilians have been killed or injured in recent weeks. He told the council that the situation in the city of Idlib and the surrounding areas in the northwest of Syria is of grave concern, with an alarming spike in civilian casualties.
This month marks the 8th year since the Syria crisis began. 8 years of lives being uprooted, 8 years of families being torn apart, and 8 years of children being needlessly exposed by traumatic violence. And 8 years on, the humanitarian crisis in Syria is far from over. United Nations assessments indicate that 11.7 million people require humanitarian assistance and protection inside the country in 2019. More than 5.6 million Syrians live as refugees across the region. And while violence has decreased in many locations, in others, recent weeks have seen increasing numbers of civilians killed and injured.
Je remercie le représentant de la Chine.
2 years on from the world's largest outbreak of acute watery diarrhea and cholera, which affected more than 1 million people in 2017, Yemen is seeing a sharp increase in new reported cases and deaths associated with the diseases. The UN Children's Fund, or UNICEF, and the World Health Organization are warning that over 100,000 cases were reported between the beginning of the year and mid-March, and that nearly a third of those affected are children under 5. The two UN agencies are worried that the number of suspected cholera cases is likely to increase given the early arrival of the rainy season, the collapse of basic services such as life-saving water systems, and the poor status of sewage disposal systems. In a statement released on Wednesday, UNICEF and WHO said that they are doing everything possible to avoid the repeat of the 2017 outbreak, but intense fighting, access restrictions, and bureaucracy are hampering their efforts to fight the diseases effectively. There is an urgent need to protect tens of thousands of women in Mozambique who bore the brunt of Cyclone Idai, the UN said. In a statement, Andrea Wojnar, representative of the UN Population Fund, or UNFPA, in Mozambique, said that the agency fears it's a race against time to provide the estimated 75,000 vulnerable women and adolescent girls with life-saving sexual and reproductive health services. She added that over 45,000 births are expected in the next 6 months, and 7,000 of those could involve life-threatening complications. Women and girls also face a rising risk of exploitation and sexual violence, and UNFPA is working to establish safe spaces for them where information, psychosocial support, and referrals to medical and legal services will be available. Displaced Zimbabweans struggle to survive after losing their homes in the devastating cyclone Idai that swept through southern Africa over a week ago.
I was sleeping. Then water falls away in the inside of the house. Then we wake up and run away.
As to say we need this or that, I think we will be understating. Whatever anyone can provide, it will be desperately needed.
Across the affected area, it's estimated that almost 3 million people have been affected, of whom nearly 500,000 have been driven from their homes. Cyclone Idai smashed into Mozambique on March 15, unleashing hurricane-force winds and rain that flooded much of the center of the country and then battered eastern Zimbabwe and Malawi. More than 700 people have been killed in Mozambique, and Zimbabwe alone, and hundreds are missing, according to an AFP toll compiled from figures provided by governments and some UN agencies. The UN's World Food Program, or WFP, said roughly 3,125 square kilometers of land had been swamped, and nearly 3 million people across the 3 countries had been affected. And before we go on a break, instead of making a wish for himself on the eve of his 74th birthday, President Duterte wished for the Philippines to progress and prosper. A video shared by Latina Enclaves property manager Juana Valenzona to media showed the president making a birthday wish before blowing his candles on his cake.
My wish is that we will just continue to progressive and prosper. Hindi tayo kasali dahil na gulo-gulo sa... I wish you all happiness.
Meanwhile, photos shared by former special assistant to the president and senatorial candidate Christopher Bongo showed Duterte, the president, feasting on assorted maki, sashimi, and other Japanese food. As in previous years, the president spent his birthday with the family in his hometown, Davao City. Duterte is the oldest Filipino politician to be elected president in Philippine history. Happy birthday, President Duterte, and we'll be back with the business news right after this break. Stay tuned.
Health is our most important.
Monsanto has been ordered to pay some $80 million to an American retiree who blames his cancer on the agribusiness giant's weed killer Roundup, in a case that could influence the outcome of thousands more like it. A San Francisco jury found the firm, which is owned by Bayer, had been negligent by not using reasonable care to warn of the risks of its product, ordering it to pay Edwin Hardman $75 million in punitive damages, a little over $5 million in compensation, and $200,000 for medical expenses. It was the second stinging legal verdict for Monsanto in recent months after it lost the case to a California school groundskeeper suffering from terminal non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and was ordered to pay out tens of millions of dollars. The jury also found that Roundup's design was defective and that the product lacked sufficient warnings of potential risk. The same jury had previously found in an earlier part of the trial that a quarter-century exposure to Roundup, whose principal ingredient is the controversial chemical glyphosate, was a substantial factor in giving the 70-year-old Hardman non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The decision also marks a major setback for Bayer, which purchased Monsanto in June 2018 for $63 billion. The case is one of more than 11,200 similar cases in the U.S. alone involving Roundup. Monsanto has consistently denied that the weed killer causes cancer and challenged findings by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, an arm of the World Health Organization, which classified glyphosate as a probable carcinogen in 2015. In other business news, Iceland's budget carrier WOW Air said it has ceased operations and canceled all flights on Thursday, potentially stranding thousands of passengers. The collapse of the troubled airline, which transports more than a third of those traveling to Iceland, comes after buyout talks with rival Iceland Air collapsed earlier this week. WOW Air, founded in 2011, exploited Iceland's location in the middle of the North Atlantic to offer a low-cost service between Europe and North America, as well as tapping into a tourist boom to the volcanic island. However, it had flown into financial trouble in recent years due to heightened competition and rising fuel prices, and had been searching for an investor for months. On Monday, WOW Air said it was in talks to restructure its debt with its creditors after Iceland Air ended brief negotiations over buying a stake in the no-frills airline. WOW Air was left needing $42 million to save the company, according to the Fréttablaðið newspaper. A report by a governmental work group has warned that a WOW Air bankruptcy would lead to a drop in Iceland's gross domestic product, a drop in the value of the krona, and rising inflation. Dan Elwell, acting head of the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, insists that the Boeing 737 MAX will only return to service when FAA analysis indicates it is appropriate to do so, as he faces tough questions from senators over the agency's relationship with the aircraft manufacturer. Take a look.
We will take immediate and appropriate action based on the facts. U.S. and international operators of the 737 MAX are relying on the FAA to get it right. I want to assure you and everyone else that the FAA will go wherever the facts lead us in our pursuit of safety. The 737 MAX will return to service for U.S. carriers only when the FAA's analysis of the facts and technical data indicate that it is appropriate to do so.
Ahead of the tough questioning, the company launched a campaign to convince the flying public that it is addressing the issues with the 737 MAX, including a fix to the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS, implicated in the deadly crashes. Boeing unveiled the software changes, which Senate said were developed after months of testing and hundreds of hours at the company's massive factory in Renton, Washington, and offered reassurances.
Our hearts go out to all of the loved ones and friends and family of the people that were lost. We mourn this loss of life, and we're going to do everything that we can do to ensure that accidents like these never happen again. We're working with pilots and industry officials. We have 200 of them today in our Renton facility, and we'll be spending time with them today to explain the updates that we're making to the 737 MAX, to get their input and to earn their trust.
The MCAS, which lowers the aircraft's nose if it detects a stall or loss of airspeed, was developed specifically for the 737 MAX, which has heavier engines than its predecessor. Among the changes, the MCAS will no longer repeatedly make corrections when the pilot tries to regain control, and will automatically disconnect in the event of disagreements between the two angle of attack AOA sensors, the company said. The initial investigation into the October Lion air crash in Indonesia, which killed all 189 people on board, found that one of the AOA sensors failed but continued to transmit erroneous information to the MCAS.
It is still yet to be determined if the malfunctioning of the AOA caused the crash. We actually don't know the cause of the crash. There's a lot more to find out through the investigation. There was not specific instruction on the MCAS to my knowledge, specifically because it was not a system that went directly to what the pilots flew on the MAX.
Beijing said U.S. and Chinese negotiators are still facing a large amount of work as they meet for fresh talks aimed at resolving a months-long trade war.
近期，刘鹤副总理与美国贸易代表莱特希泽、财长姆努钦就中美经贸问题举行多轮电话磋商，双方取得一些进展，但仍有大量工作有待完成。
U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin are expected to begin 2 days of talks in Beijing with China's top economic official Liu He, the first since China put into law new measures seen as an olive branch in their high-stakes standoff. The two sides have slapped tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of goods since last year, hitting a slew of businesses. President Trump suggested last week some of those tariffs should stay in place after a deal is reached to ensure China follows through. Beijing has taken steps to address some U.S. complaints. Earlier this month, China's rubber stamp parliament rushed through a law that seeks to protect foreign firms from the forced transfer of technology. Premier Li Keqiang on Thursday repeated his pledge to step up punishment for intellectual property infringers to ensure they bear an unpayable cost, addressing a major bone of contention in Washington. Negotiators hope to iron out remaining differences on other issues, including Beijing's subsidies to state-owned firms and policies to build up Chinese companies in strategic sectors. When Li presented the government's 2019 policy plans earlier this month, he made no mention of its controversial Made in China 2025 industrial policy, which had called for Chinese firms to take control of many strategic industries. In other business news, Mercedes-Benz maker Daimler and Chinese auto giant Geely announced plans to develop the next generation of electric smart cars to be made in China in a joint venture. Under the agreement expected to be finalized by the end of the year, the new vehicle will go on global sale in 2022, the German and Chinese car giants said in a statement. The 12-strong board of directors of the new venture will be made up of 6 executives from each company. The new smart cars will be styled by the Mercedes-Benz design network with engineering provided by Geely. Prior to the launch of the next generation, Daimler will continue to produce the current 4.2 model of the smart car at its plant in Hambach, northeastern France. The smart car will then leave its historic home in France to be manufactured in China. But Daimler insists no jobs will be lost. The Vancouver Fashion Week extended its runway to the world. Eagle News correspondent Archie Rosa Tividad was at the scene. Take a look.
Strutting its way into the fashion scene. We are here at David Lam Hall for Vancouver Fashion Week. Let's check out why Vancouver is becoming a major player in the fashion industry.
One of the guests attending Vancouver Fashion Week is Miss J. Alexander, famously known as the runway coach and TV personality on America's Next Top Model. Always scouring the globe for talent, Miss J came to check out what Vancouver has to offer.
I just love fashion. I mean, my passion is fashion. I love it. I like seeing the mistakes turn into good mistakes. I like to see the talent that is blossoming. I like to follow certain talent that grows. And yeah, I mean, we have Fashion Week all over the world right now, so I mean, it's crazy. There's a lot of great talent coming out of Asia. In Korea, there's a lot of great talent too. And let's see if we can put on the map here from Vancouver.
Talent from the Philippines has been making a splash in the international scene. One of the designers to watch is Tia Luxont from Luxont, who showcased her line called Renaissance at Vancouver Fashion Week. We got the scoop on the inspiration behind her collection.
I'm so happy that the Philippines is also being known not just as a place of beauty, but also a place that comes with talent. So I think it's really a great feeling, a great opportunity, and I'm so proud to represent the Philippines through my designs also. It's a way of showing how we Filipinos, how we style ourselves, and how we represent ourselves through the clothes that we are showing here. I'm also inspired by the modern woman who's just confident to become a better version of herself. That's why my collection, the one that I showed here right now, is called Renaissance because it means rebirth.
With exciting things coming up in fashion, look no further than Vancouver to extend its runway to the rest of the world.
Reporting for Eagle News from Vancouver Fashion Week, I'm Archie Rosa TV Dad, and I'm 1 with 25.
Thank you, Archie Rose, and that's it for tonight's broadcast. For everyone here on Eagle News International, I'm Alma Angeles, always 1 with 25. Good night.